you're a whistleblower. There's been lots of whistleblowers within Secret Service speaking out right now.
I have a timeline that does not have specifics.
Oof.
They don't fear these hearings. It's just something that they have to get through. They can filibuster for the 4, 6, 8 hours, whatever is necessary, because there's not going to be any accountability. The pose of being really tough on these leaders, theoretically, of these agencies, when in fact they're just kind of rubber stamping their budget request for the next fiscal year. It's not a second shooter. It's not that this was a Manchurian candidate where they hypnotized this guy or there's a zip lining ninja. It was just a government worker who was hot and didn't want to be uncomfortable, so they went inside to the air conditioning.
By the way, my name is Joe McClane. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Hey, did you do what I did and just spend like 4 hours of your life yesterday watching Director Kimberly Cheatle not respond to Democrats or Republicans in the House Oversight hearing yesterday? It was a doozy, to say the least. I didn't learn anything, not really, other than that they're just not going to tell us what we want to know. But this was one of my favorite clips. Take a listen.
How did he fly a drone over the area, period? Any part of the area?
Again, I would have to go back and check the timeline of when that took place and when the event.
Why didn't you bring the timeline with you today to answer our questions?
I don't have all of the answers on the timelines based on the criminal investigation.
Were you not prepared today to answer our questions?
I am prepared to answer the questions based on the information and wanted to be able to provide.
Do you have a timeline at all from any of the day?
I have a timeline that does not have specifics.
Oof, a timeline that does not have specifics. Yikes, let that sink in. Joining us right now is Steve Friend. He's a senior fellow at the Center for Renewing America. He's also the host of the American Radicals podcast over on Rumble. We're going to put a link to his podcast as well as to the Center for Renewing America. Steve is also a former FBI agent and whistleblower. Steve, good morning to you. Thank you for your time today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
That was a crazy hearing yesterday, to sit there for 4 hours and listen to Director Cheatle repeatedly refuse to answer questions. What do you make of that as a former FBI agent?
Well, I think we've seen it time and time again from other people like her, like Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, like Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security. They don't fear these hearings. It's just something that they have to get through. They can filibuster for the 4, 6, 8 hours, whatever is necessary, because there's not going to be any accountability. The Republicans that theoretically control the power of the purse strings that are running these hearings haven't used that power to inflict any sort of pain on these agencies. So they figured, look, it's just going to be a rough day, some bad headlines. Each one of the members is going to get their viral moment. We'll get them on cable news tonight, but then it'll be back to business tomorrow.
Yeah. It really came down to that. I was really surprised at how many on the Democrat side were actually pressing her as well. A lot of them just use it for gun control opportunity, get some sound bites in, but several of them expressed their frustration and anger at the lack of information. So very bipartisan anger at this point. I think that's at least a decent sign for our country, don't you?
I agree with you. Whenever the Venn diagram can overlap, they might disagree on what's behind the reason for the problem, but they are nonetheless agreeing that there is, in fact, a problem. I don't think that they're really interested in solving the problem. That's why I always think if you put the Wonder Woman lasso of truth around all these Democrats that push for gun control, they don't actually want that because they just want the talking point to get elected on. But similarly, I think the Republicans that go in there want to have the pose of being really tough on these leaders, theoretically, of these agencies, when in fact they're just kind of rubber stamping their budget request for the next fiscal year. It's having been in the hot seat for that day and being under fire there, and then waiting and looking at my phone and not hearing any sort of follow-up on it. I get frustrated with the hearings. I feel like it's sound and fury signifying nothing.
One of the things that really frustrates me about this entire process, anything like this that happens, is the Americans seemingly have no right to know. We don't know. Like we don't get to know how many shell casings were found on top of that roof. I don't get to see a map that points out where the van was actually parked. I haven't seen that. anywhere. It's supposedly filled with explosives next to a gas line. Where's this gas line? Show me the map. Why don't I get to know that? I didn't ask what the procedures were for Secret Service to protect the Donald Trump. I'm not asking for secret, strategic information that if it got spilled out would put people in harm's way. I want to know who the officer was that was apparently assigned to the roof, but didn't want to stay up there because it was hot, at least according to Senator Josh Hawley's letter yesterday. Why don't the American people get to know these facts? Why are we the ones, we pay the taxes, we keep the government up and running, but we don't get to know any of this? That seems bizarre to me. What say you?
This is one of the most frustrating parts of being an American citizen, American taxpayer. And I think the scales fell away from our eyes a lot in the last few years, where the government purported to have secret knowledge about a chest cold that you had to stay home and stay safe and then take an experimental vaccine in order to save grandma. And people lost their trust in the government. And then the problem then is if you don't trust what the government's telling you, you're more inclined to believe anything else, which is why you've seen some of these rampant, ridiculous conspiracy theories. But I share your sentiment and your frustration. That sort of information needs to be transparently available so that we don't have ridiculous allegations like the assistant director of the FBI was undercover standing behind Donald Trump, or there's some guy on a water tower who zip-lined away after he took the second shot. Those things are just laughable, but people don't have anything else to generate an answer in their head. They can't connect the synapses, that they're not firing there because there are so many questions. There needs to be a transparent investigation. Maybe the Congress can authorize a parallel one, because the FBI is certainly never going to pull back the veil whatsoever on this, and they don't have a track record of doing that. They just released the quote-unquote motive of the Vegas shooting, and they said it was because of gambling losses. They ruled the congressional baseball shooting where Steve Scalise was almost killed and 10% of the Republicans caucus was summarily executed. They ruled that a suicide by cop, not an assassination attempt. There needs to be some sort of accountability, a fully transparent investigation where you can have that sort of information presented that doesn't compromise the investigation itself.
Several members yesterday in the hearing kept bringing up, it's been 9 days. It's been 9 days, Director Cheatle. Why don't you have this information? And I think it was Rep. Paula Luna that came out and said, let's just debunk the myths. Can we just at least debunk the conspiracy theories at the very least? And she mentions lots of things like a second shooter, but it seemed like they're having a hard time getting Director Cheatle to give up any information. Is it fair to say, she said it would take 60 days to come up with a report. That said Ocasio-Cortez really off. They don't have that kind of time to win the next election. So is it reasonable to say that in 9 days after an event of the historical magnitude that we've just experienced, is it reasonable that she would know exactly how the kid got on the roof, exactly which agents were responsible for doing what, exactly when the Secret Service team was informed that there was a potential threat, a suspicious person, and then obviously a threat, and he had a gun or didn't have a gun? Like, there seems to be some basic facts here that even Democrats and Republicans both are saying that you should know this stuff, but she seems to think she had no information and it would take 60 days. Is 60 days a reasonable number?
No. I mean, look, this is a tremendous security failure. There needs to be every resource thrown at this available to investigate what actually went wrong for this catastrophic failure to have occurred. And I would respect Director Cheatle more if she said something to the effect of, look, I'm the director of the Secret Service. I have oversight of the entire agency. I don't approve every single ops plan, every single site advance. I can't tell you where the failures were the day of, but I will devote all of my attention to doing that for you in a timely fashion. And 60 days isn't it. But I would think that a week and a half is completely a reasonable amount of time that she should have been prepared. And if she wasn't, she should have sent somebody in her stead or had somebody at her side that could have answered those questions.
Do you think she should resign?
Oh, unquestionably. This failure here on her. And look, if she had echoed what I just said and said, look, I'm not in the weeds. I'm making sure the trains run on time, but I will devote everything I can to correcting the problem and holding the failed parties accountable. Maybe you give her some grace. But the fact that she's said, well, the buck stops with me, but meanwhile, I'm not going to give you any information, nor should you expect any from me because I don't have it, is just a failure of leadership that she can never overcome. There's too much red in her ledger at this point.
You know, I think we mentioned the Vegas shooting a minute ago, and I remember like watching that. Just my mind got so twisted around that whole thing. I just still couldn't understand like what happened or why or what the details were. It was so mind numbing. But at least they held, briefings like every day. They were trying to tell you and give you some sort of information. We've had a lot less of that with the attempted assassination of a former president. Kind of a big deal. Josh Hawley, in his letter that he put out yesterday, mentions that someone was in fact assigned to the roof. There was an assignment. Someone was supposed to be on that roof, but didn't want to be on the roof because it was hot. It was hot. It was a hot day in Pennsylvania. Come to Texas. We'll show you hot. But nonetheless, that would seem to indicate to me, because Director Cheatle testified yesterday that no one was assigned to that roof, that it was outside the security perimeter for the U.S. Secret Service, and it had Overwatch, and that was all. That seems to be potential perjury right there. Is she just maybe speaking casually here, or is this something more serious?
Well, she might not know where the actual assignment fell. It might have been given to outside agencies. Maybe some state agency or the local police had Overwatch responsibility of that. That doesn't make sense to me because it's so close to where the target was going to be standing. You would think that a reasonably minded Secret Service agent would think, hey, we need to have our personnel up there. But from what we're finding out, they were very understaffed. They were actually augmenting their workforce and their supportive detail, security detail, with regular Homeland Security agents untrained to protection. Look, this is actually the most plausible explanation for the failure that I've heard to this point. It's not a second shooter. It's not that this was a Manchurian candidate or they hypnotized this guy or there's a zip-lining ninja. It was just a government worker who was hot and didn't want to be uncomfortable, so they went inside to the air conditioning. So when my steady Occam's razor with this, I call it like the government midwit razor, always assume incompetence. That's what the government is. It's incompetent people doing incompetent things to good people incompetently.
It's funny when someone asks me how I'm doing, I will often say I'm good enough for government work, because in the Marine Corps, that was like one of our favorite sayings, good enough for government work. And let that sink in, right? But okay, so Steve, you're a whistleblower. There's been lots of whistleblowers within Secret Service speaking out right now. And I found that fascinating. Like the next day, they're already talking. That should indicate there's some big problems there. But I think the American people, right, left, and in the middle, they don't trust the government anymore. The words palace coup are in the headlines this morning about Joe Biden, who's not been seen since July 17th, getting off a plane in Delaware. So we don't trust anything in the government anymore. Do you think it's possible to regain trust?
I think you're going to need a massive reform or a complete reboot, 6 of one, half dozen of the other, if you're going to, in fact, win back the support. There are certain mechanisms that you could use, in fact, to maybe garner people's support, and that is to return the power to the people to the greatest extent possible. So I'm often asked about the FBI because that's my ex-girlfriend, that's my subject matter expertise, and what would I do if I was installed as a director or something to that effect? And I would say I would shut it down and I would deputize local police to have those sorts of powers, because those are the experienced officers. Those are the agencies that are more accountable to the localities. They know the usual suspects. They have the subject matter expertise and the training to do that. And I think people would trust their sheriff a lot more than a director from a capital in a distant ivory city. I think the more that we can localize things and return ourselves to some semblance of the doctrine of the lesser magistrate, to a true small R Republican form of government, that's a way that we can restore trust, because you're trusting in yourself. You're betting on yourself.
A lot of people were saying we were on the verge of civil war with that bullet shot at the head of Donald Trump. Do you think so?
I don't. I think civil war looks a lot like watching your wife or your children bleed out in your front yard. And we watch people mask up their kids and go into a Costco for 3 years. People aren't ready for that. They're still too darn comfortable. They need to exhaust every other option possible. Go to a school board meeting, get involved in your town council. Let's stop short of going to a kinetic
Amen. War. Yeah, well said. Steve Friend, God bless you and God love you, my friend. Really appreciate you being on the show, giving us your input.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.